Now let's take a look at a couple of settings that can make our interface behave a little bit differently that can speed up our workflow just a little bit. So let's go ahead and open this up, and you can see I've got the tool palette over here docked on the right in this tray. And you can see what happens if I start to come in and open up some of these sub palettes, and then I need to go back and access something up here and then come back in down here, and I start to get all of these open, and they all take a little bit of time to open, and then they're all kind of open over here, and then if I want to kind of see something in the middle, sometimes it's a little bit hard to see. So we can actually change the behavior of these palettes, and let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go into Preferences, let's go into Interface, and let's open up Palettes. So right now, the first thing I want to look at is this open-close duration. So let's go ahead and set to 0.7 right now. Let's go ahead and crank this up all the way to 1. So now you can see when I open these subpalettes, it really takes a long time. Okay, and that's wasting time that we could be working. So what we want to do is actually take this open-close duration, and I'm going to go ahead and take this all the way down to 0. So now you can see it's really snappy in opening up those subpalettes. Okay, it just opens right up. Now, one thing that we also might want to change, and again, all these things are up to you, depends on your workflow, but one thing that might be good is to be able to only have one subpalette open at once. Okay, so I'm going to go down here, and there's a button called One Open Subpalette, so let's go ahead and activate that. And let's go ahead and close all of these. Oops. Okay, so I'll open up the subtool, and I'm going to open up geometry, and you can see that that closes that subtool palette. So in this case, we're only able to have one open at a time. So if I go into UV map or I go into texture map, it's closing those other subtools, so I'm not left with this huge long thing. I've got to scroll constantly to look back and forth with what I've got. I can go in, do what I want. If I close that up, now I've got my complete list right here in front of me that I can go ahead and select again. Okay, now inside some of these subpalettes are actual these UI groups, and so we can do the same thing here. You can see if I open these up, we get all of that detail organized, and that's really nice. Let's go ahead and go into under palettes UI groups, and we can click this auto close UI groups. Okay, so now when we do this, it's doing the same thing it did with our subpalettes, except now it's doing it with our UI groups. So we only can have that open. Now if you want to have multiple ones open at once, obviously you want to turn that off. Now let's say we have multiple palettes in a particular tray. So if I bring over my render palette there, we can do the same thing here. So let's go into Preferences. We'll go back into Palettes and turn on Auto Collapse. So we've got our tool palette on, turned on or expanded, and then we'll expand our render palette. You can see it automatically collapses that tool palette. So if we have multiple palettes in here, we can go ahead and just have one of those open at a time. So it kind of cascades down from the palettes to the subpalettes to the UI groups, and just enables you not to have to scroll so much when you're working here in ZBrush in these trays. In addition, let me actually go ahead and put some of those back here. Okay, so we have a few of these palettes in here. We can go back to our interface, and under the subpalette group, we can use palette and subpalette pop-up. And what that'll do is enable you, if I click on the title, I can select a different palette that's docked here. So I don't necessarily have them listed out, but I have those sort of pop-up that I can select, and it sort of replaces that one. Okay, same thing here. I've got the subtool subpalette, and that's the only one visible. If I want to access any of the other subpalettes, I can just click on this name, and then I can go in and select. And so if that's something that will make things easier for you, then go ahead and do that. That's located under Preferences again, and you can see I can go ahead now and select down to Interface, and then I can turn that off if I don't like that. And one more thing, under palettes you can also have both trays auto collapse. Right now the left tray auto collapses. In this case we could also have the right tray auto collapse. And then if I have some palettes over here in the left tray, you can see it auto collapses much like we did with the other option there. All right. So that's just a few things you can do to kind of speed up your workflow in your trays, working with your palettes and having to look up and down for some of the different options that you're looking for. Some of those options can speed things up for you. The next thing that we want to look at is actually creating our own custom menu or palette. And so that can contain different tools that we want to use on a regular basis, can contain custom buttons or tools that we want to add to it, and some things that we might want to access more quickly. So we'll take a look at creating a custom palette in the next lesson.